A corrupt mayor's son shoved an 80-year-old veteran to the ground in the middle of a crowded parking lot, mocking the medal on his chest as people stood by, too afraid to interfere. He thought he was untouchable, protected by power and his father's name. But what he didn't know was that the old man's grandson, a U.S. Army sergeant, and his K-9 partner were on their way to pick him up. And when they arrived, everything changed. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, and if this story touches your heart, please subscribe for more tales of faith, courage, and the miracles that still walk among us. Morning came quietly over Ridgefield, Colorado. The last snow of winter had thinned into a mist that drifted through the streets like breath on glass. The air smelled faintly of pine and cold iron, the kind of cold that made old bones ache but sharpened the mind. Henry Carter stood by the window of his small cabin at the edge of town, adjusting the cuff of his faded flannel shirt. He was 80 years old, a Korean War veteran, and though time had taken much from him, friends, strength, even the steadiness of his hands, it had not taken his pride. Pinned neatly to the breast of his old wool coat was a silver star, dulled by years yet still gleaming faintly in the pale light. He wore it not to boast, but as a quiet reminder that he had once stood tall when the world was burning. On the table beside him lay a small brown gift box tied with twine. Inside, wrapped in soft paper, was a vintage compass, his birthday present for his grandson, Sergeant Luke Carter, a U.S. Army soldier recently back from deployment in Afghanistan. Luke had offered to drive him to the shopping center that morning, but Henry had refused with his usual gruffness. "If a man stops walking for himself, he starts waiting to die," he'd said, adjusting his worn cap. So he took the early bus into town, the box tucked securely under his arm. The bus was half empty. A pair of students, a woman reading a newspaper, a young man asleep against the window. Henry nodded politely to the driver, who recognized him. "Morning, Mr. Carter. Headed to the mall again?" "Just a quick errand," Henry replied with a faint smile. "For family." By the time he arrived, the parking lot outside Ridgefield Central Mall was already busy. Engines rumbling, carts squeaking, the dull chatter of weekend shoppers. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed above polished tile floors. He moved slowly but with purpose, cane in hand, stopping by the gift shop to have the compass wrapped neatly. It was a simple joy, to choose something for someone he loved. Luke had been more than a grandson. He was the closest thing Henry had left to legacy. The boy had grown into a soldier, disciplined, steady, carrying the same quiet fire Henry once did. When Henry exited the Sternhor, the sunlight had softened into late morning haze. He walked toward the bus stop, gift in hand. Near the lot's exit, a group of young men leaned against a black pickup truck, their laughter sharp and mean. At their center stood Travis Doyle, 23, son of the town's mayor. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with slick blonde hair and the kind of smirk that came easily to those who'd never been told no. Henry tried to pass quietly, but Travis stepped forward. "Hey, old man," he called out. "That a war medal on your coat? You get that for shooting people or for getting lucky?" Henry stopped, turned slightly. His voice was calm, his words careful. "For keeping fools like you free, to run your mouths." The laughter from the group sharpened. Travis's grin faltered, replaced by something colder. "You think you're a hero, wearing that rusty badge like anyone cares?" Henry didn't answer. He just adjusted his grip on the box and began to walk away. But Travis wasn't done. He stepped closer, blocking the path, and with a sudden shove to the shoulder, sent the old man sprawling onto the concrete. The box flew from his hands, landing hard, the sound of breaking glass echoing faintly through the air. For a moment, everything froze. The group fell silent. People passing by looked, and then quickly looked away. A mother pulled her child closer. No one moved to help. Blood trickled down from Henry's temple as he struggled to sit up, breath shallow from the fall. His cane clattered beside him. Travis scoffed. "Guess medals don't keep you on your feet forever, huh?" That was when a young woman's voice cut through the stillness. "That's enough!" She was slender but strong, wearing a dark security uniform with the Ridgefield Mall badge on her sleeve. Her name tag read Maya Brooks. She had sharp brown eyes, a ponytail tucked under her cap, and the kind of expression that said she'd seen too much disrespect in one lifetime. Without hesitation, she knelt beside Henry, helping him to sit upright. "Sir, are you all right?" she asked, her voice soft but urgent. Henry dabbed at his temple with a shaking hand. "I'm fine, miss. Just old bones." Maya turned a glare toward Travis. "You lay a hand on him again, and I'll make sure every camera in this building has your face on record." Travis sneered but didn't step closer. His friends muttered something and pulled him back toward the truck. "Come on, man, let's go." With a final scoff, Travis spat near the old man's feet and walked off. The sound of the truck's engine roared as they left the lot. Maya sighed, shaking her head. "I'm sorry, sir. Some people think respect's optional these days." Henry tried to stand, wincing slightly. "The world's always had fools, miss. It's the quiet ones like you that keep it running." He looked around, scanning the ground. "Did you see a small brown box? I dropped it when I fell." Maya reached under a nearby car and pulled it out, the twine broken, the corner crushed. She handed it to him carefully. Inside, the compass lay cracked, the glass splintered. Henry stared at it for a long moment. His lips trembled slightly, but his eyes stayed calm. "Well," he said quietly, "it's the thought that counts." Maya helped him to a nearby bench near the edge of the lot. The cold air stung a little harder now. A few people glanced over, then hurried away. The world kept moving. She offered him a bottle of water from her belt pack. "Do you want me to call someone? Maybe your family?" He shook his head. "No, my grandson's picking me up later. He's soldier. He'll be here soon." She noticed the silver star pinned to his coat, a faint smear of blood just beneath it. "You really served?" Henry nodded slowly. "A long time ago. Korea. It was cold there, too. But at least the cold was honest." They sat in silence for a moment. Somewhere above them, a flag on a pole flapped in the wind, its edges frayed, but still proud. Maya looked at him, something heavy forming behind her eyes. "People don't change until they're forced to see what they've become," she murmured. Henry gave a small, knowing smile. "Then maybe it's time this town opened its eyes." He looked down at the cracked compass in his lap. For a second, his reflection stared back from the broken glass, older, wearier, but unbroken. As the clouds began to gather again over Ridgefield, Henry leaned back on the bench, gift box resting in his hands. The wind swept through the lot, carrying with it the faint echo of distant thunder. And somewhere, in the hum of that gray afternoon, an old soldier sat quietly, one hand over his broken compass, the other resting near his heart, where the silver star still gleamed faintly in the dying light. The sun was dipping toward the Rockies when Luke Carter turned his Ford F-150 into the Ridgefield Mall parking lot. The air was brittle, blue with the cold that lingered after the melt, and the windshield caught the late light in slanted stripes of gold. Beside him, his old service dog, Valor, a sable-furred German shepherd, 8 years old, sat alert in the passenger seat. Even retired, the dog still moved like a soldier, back straight, head high, eye scanning. Luke had served with him for 6 years in Afghanistan, and though the war had left scars on both, their bond was the kind that outlasts commands and ranks. Luke himself was 32, broad-shouldered, with short dark hair beginning to gray at the temples. The years had carved quiet lines around his eyes, not from age, but from watching too much and saying too little. After months away, this was supposed to be a calm day, a simple errand. His grandfather had insisted on taking the bus that morning. "A man should buy his own gifts," Henry had said on the phone, the tone that ended all arguments. Now, as Luke neared the mall, Valor stiffened. The shepherd's ears pricked, a low growl rumbling from his chest. Luke glanced at him. "What is it, boy?" The dog's gaze fixed ahead, toward a small crowd gathering near the lot's far end. Luke parked fast. As soon as his boots hit the ground, he saw it, an old man sitting on the concrete, a security guard kneeling beside him, and a group of young men retreating toward a truck. His heart lurched. "Grandpa!" he shouted, breaking into a run. Henry looked up, dazed, a streak of blood drying at his temple. Maya Brooks was crouched beside him, trying to steady his arm. The shattered remains of a gift box lay open on his lap. Luke dropped to his knees. "What happened?" Maya looked at him, recognizing the same blue eyes in a younger face. "He was pushed. Those guys, Travis Doyle and his friends. They're leaving now." Luke turned. Travis was already smirking from across the lot, one hand shoved in his jacket pocket. "Oh, the soldier boy's here," he called, his voice dripping with mockery. "Guess it runs in the family. Metal chasers." Luke rose slowly. His movements were calm, almost too calm. Valor stood at his side, tail low, muscles tight. "Say you're sorry," Luke said, voice quiet but carrying, "then walk away." Travis snorted. "What if I don't? Then you'll regret it." The young man stepped forward and shoved him in the chest. A challenge. Luke barely moved. In one smooth, trained motion, he grabbed Travis's wrist, twisted, and turned him down to one knee. The move was defensive, precise, no more force than necessary. Valor stepped forward, growling low, blocking the others who started to move in. The crowd gasped. Phones came out. Maya shouted, "That's enough! Everyone back up!" Travis's face flushed red with humiliation. "You're assaulting me," he barked, clutching his arm as Luke released him. Before Luke could speak, red and blue lights flickered across the pavement. A police cruiser pulled up, 2 officers inside. The older one, Deputy Carl Denton, thick-necked and weary, climbed out with a sigh that sounded too familiar, like a man tired of doing the wrong thing for the wrong people. "What's going on here?" Denton asked, looking from Travis to Luke. Travis straightened, rubbing his wrist. "He attacked me. Ask anyone." Maya stepped forward. "That's not true. He was defending his grandfather. You can check the cameras." Denton hesitated, but only for a second. "Cameras in this section are down," he muttered, then louder. "Both of you, Mr. Carter and the soldier, come with us. We'll sort this out at the station." Luke blinked, disbelief washing over him. "You're arresting us?" He shoved an 80-year-old man. Denton's jaw tightened. "Orders from above. Let's not make this harder." Travis smirked, backing away toward his truck. "Welcome home, hero." Luke clenched his fists, but Henry's frail hand touched his arm. "Don't," the old man whispered. "Not here. Not for him." Valor gave a low whine, sensing the restraint in his handler's voice. Luke nodded, breathing through the heat in his chest. "Fine. We'll go." At the station, the fluorescent lights buzzed like angry bees. Henry sat on a metal chair, his hands trembling slightly as he filled out a report that nobody would read. Valor lay beside him, resting his head on his paws, eyes following every move in the room. Luke stood by the desk, his jaw locked tight. Across from him, Sheriff Brody Hanley, a man in his 50s with slicked hair and a smile too smooth, leaned back in his chair. "So," Hanley said, flipping through papers without interest, "you're Luke Carter, Army Sergeant, decorated. Shame what happened out there." Luke frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" Hanley shrugged. "You know, overseas, people come back. Tense. Sometimes things get misunderstood. That kid attacked my grandfather." Hanley's eyes narrowed just slightly. "That kid is the mayor's son. Maybe you should think twice before throwing him on the ground in public." Luke leaned forward, voice low but steady. "Maybe your badge should mean something." Hanley's smile disappeared. "Watch your tones, Sergeant." From his chair, Henry spoke up quietly. "You can threaten a soldier, Sheriff, but you can't erase what happened. The truth has a way of walking through walls." Hanley ignored him. "You're free to go for now," he said finally, "but I'd advise staying out of trouble. Ridgefield's a peaceful town. We like to keep it that way." Luke took the paperwork, unsigned, and turned to leave. Henry rose slowly, Valor circling to his side. As they stepped outside into the evening air, Maya was waiting near the steps, arms folded. The cold wind had deepened. Her breath came out in small white clouds. "They're not even going to file the report," she said bitterly. Luke stopped. "You work for the mall?" She nodded. "Security. I saw what happened. I tried calling the police myself, but—" She trailed off. "You know how this town works." He looked at her for a moment, then nodded. "Yeah, I think I'm starting to." Henry spoke softly behind him. "You did right, Luke, but right doesn't always win." Luke opened the truck door. Valor jumped in first, waiting. "Then we make it win," Luke said quietly, "no matter how long it takes." Maya's eyes lingered on him. There was something unspoken there, respect mixed with worry. "Be careful," she said. "They'll protect their own." He nodded once, then climbed into the truck. As the engine started, Valor looked out the window, ears still raised, as if the shepherd knew this wasn't over. The truck rolled into the darkening street. Behind them, the neon glow of Ridgefield flickered against the snow-dusted rooftops, while in the sheriff's office a single phone rang. Hanley picked it up, his tone deferential. "Yes, Mayor Doyle," he said quietly. "It's handled. For now." And somewhere beyond those small-town lights, the storm began to gather. Night settled over Ridgefield like a slow-moving storm. The town's lights blinked against the black sky, soft, flickering, as if unsure whether to keep shining. At the edge of town, the Carter cabin stood silent except for the faint crackle of the fire inside. Henry sat by the window, one hand resting on Valor's thick fur. The dog's head lay across his knee, eyes half closed, ears twitching at every sound outside. Across the small room, Luke stood in front of the wood stove, shoulders tense beneath his faded army t-shirt. The day's events replayed in his mind. The shove, the sneer, the sheriff's smirk. He could still feel Travis Doyle's wrist twisting beneath his grip, the restraint so it took not to go further. Henry broke the silence first. "You should eat something, son." Luke turned, half smiling. "You sound like Grandma." "She'd say the same thing," Henry replied, eyes still on the window. "A man can't fight on an empty stomach, not even for what's right." Luke sat opposite him, elbows on knees. "I'm not sure what kind of fight this is yet, Grandpa, but it's not one I can walk away from." Valor lifted his head and made a low, questioning sound, sensing the weight in his handler's voice. Henry gave the dog's neck a gentle pat. "He knows, Luke. Dogs always do. They feel the storm before it hits." Luke looked down at the old shepherd. "He's had enough storms for one lifetime." Before Henry could answer, Luke's phone buzzed. The screen glowed with an unknown number and a message. "I have what you need, but be careful. They're watching." Attached was a single line, video file. Ridgefield Mall parking lot, 3:42 p.m. Luke frowned. "What the hell?" Henry leaned forward. "Who's it from?" "No name, just a file link." He clicked it. The video opened, grainy footage from a mall security camera. It showed Travis and his friends taunting Henry, the shove, the fall, the compass shattering on the ground. Then Luke's arrival, the brief fight, and Valor stepping forward to protect. The truth, clear and undeniable. Henry let out a slow breath. So much for broken cameras. Luke checked the sender again, noticing the small cloud logo in the corner of the link. Whoever had sent it knew what they were doing. He stood pacing. If this is real, it means someone inside the mall risked their job to send it. Henry nodded. Maybe not everyone's blind in this town. The next morning, Luke parked outside Ridgefield Mall before it opened. The air was sharp, the kind that scraped the lungs. Valor sat beside him, ears flicking as shoppers' footsteps echoed in the distance. Luke stepped out, scanning the lot. Then saw her. Maya Brooks, the security guard from yesterday, was leaning against the side door, holding a paper cup of coffee. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw him, then softened. "You got my message." "So it was you." She nodded. "I made a copy before they wiped the system. The sheriff's office called last night. They told management to delete all footage from that hour. I couldn't live with that." Luke studied her for a moment. Up close, she looked younger than he remembered, late 20s maybe, but her eyes carried the weary sharpness of someone who'd seen rules twisted too often. "You're risking your job." "I already did," she said quietly. "They reassigned me to front desk duty this morning. Too much initiative." Luke exhaled. "Then thank you. This changes everything." Maya shook her head. "It changes nothing if you don't use it right. People here, they look away when power talks. You go after Doyle or Hanley, they'll make sure it's your life that breaks, not theirs." He gave a faint, humorless smile. "I've had worse threats. Not from men like them." Their conversation was interrupted by the sharp sound of tires screeching nearby. A black SUV rolled past, slowing just long enough for its tinted window to lower a few inches. A man's voice, smooth, cold, called out, "Watch yourself, Sergeant. Not every battle's worth fighting." Then the SUV pulled away. Maya's face went pale. "That's one of Hanley's guys. Carl Denton, his deputy. I've seen him driving that car." Luke's jaw tightened. "Guess that answers whether they're watching." He looked around, making sure no one else was near. "Listen, Maya, I'll take this video, but I need you to stay low for now. They'll come after anyone connected." "I've lived with fear before," she said softly. "But silence, that's what really kills you." He paused, meeting her eyes. "Then you're braver than most." She handed him a small flash drive. "It's all here. Make sure it doesn't die in a cloud." Luke nodded and pocketed it. "You have my word." That night, the Carter cabin was quiet again, except for the rhythmic creak of the rocking chair. Henry sat wrapped in his wool blanket, Valor curled nearby. Luke stood at the old desk, the laptop's glow reflecting off his tired eyes. He transferred the video, encrypting it, saving multiple copies on drives labeled only by numbers. Henry watched him. "You're walking into something bigger than you think." Luke didn't look up. "If I don't, who will?" The old man sighed. "Back in my day, we had a saying, 'The enemy wears a uniform,' made things simple. But this kind of fight, it's harder. The bad men wear smiles, carry titles, talk about order." Luke glanced at him. "And you still fought them when you had to." Henry smiled faintly. "Only when the good men went quiet." Valor stirred at the sound of wind outside, rising to his feet, ears pricked. The dog padded to the window, staring into the dark woods beyond the cabin. Somewhere out there, a car idled, engine humming, headlights off. Luke killed the lamp, peering through the curtain. 2 faint red glows, taillights, flickered and disappeared into the trees. "They're watching," Luke muttered. Henry's voice was calm, almost resigned. "Let them. Truth makes enemies before it makes allies." Luke closed the laptop and locked it in a drawer. Tomorrow, I'll find someone who can verify this. Someone who doesn't owe Doyle anything. Henry leaned back. Then you'd better start with someone who owes you nothing either. Luke frowned. You have someone in mind? The old man's eyes glimmered in the firelight. I knew a few honest men once. Some wore badges, some didn't. Find one who still remembers why he started. Luke nodded slowly. Valor settled again at his feet. The fire popped, sending sparks into the chimney's dark throat. Outside, the wind moaned through the pines like a warning. And in the flicker of that quiet night, 3 souls, an old soldier, a young one, and a loyal dog, prepared for a different kind of war. One where courage had no medals and victory had no cheers, only the promise of truth standing against a wall built of lies. Dawn crept over Ridgefield in pale shades of blue and gold. The frost on the windows of Henry Carter's cabin caught the light, making it look like the world itself had been carved from glass. Inside, the smell of old coffee and pine smoke lingered. Luke sat at the wooden table, laptop open, the flash drive from Maya plugged in. Valor lay at his feet, chin resting on his paws, eyes half closed, but ears alert. On the screen, Luke replayed the footage again. The shove, the fall, the compass shattering. It wasn't just evidence. It was humiliation caught on film. He felt his jaw tighten. The cursor blinked beside an unsent email to a friend he hadn't spoken to in years. Ethan Miles, former CID investigator, now working as a federal consultant on military misconduct cases. They'd served together once, back when Valor was still in active service, and Luke still believed justice had clear sides. He typed quickly. Ethan, I need your eyes on something. Small-town corruption, bigger than it looks. Can't go through normal channels. You're the only one I trust. He hit send, then leaned back. Henry's voice came from behind him. You're playing with fire, son. Luke turned. The old man stood by the stove, his hand steady as he poured hot water into a chipped mug. If you think the law's on your side, you haven't lived long enough. Luke smiled faintly. You sound like you don't believe in justice anymore. I do, Henry said, handing him the mug. I just don't believe it comes free. Before Luke could answer, Valor let out a low growl, his ears twitching toward the door. A moment later, the soft knock came. 2 quick, 1 slow. Luke glanced at Henry. That's Maya. When he opened the door, Maya stood there with her dark hair damp from the cold morning mist. Her uniform was gone. Instead, she wore a gray hoodie and jeans. She looked younger like that, but the exhaustion in her eyes hadn't faded. In her hands was a small folder. They fired me this morning, she said simply. Said I broke protocol by accessing restricted footage. Henry's expression darkened. They needed someone to blame. Maya gave a small, bitter laugh. Guess I made it easy for them. She handed the folder to Luke. These are copies of employee records from the EMAL security system. Contracts, maintenance orders. Look at who owns them. Luke opened the folder. Every vendor, every subcontractor, every repair company was listed under the same umbrella. Doyle Development, LLC. He looked up. The mayor's company? Through shell corporations, Maya said. They buy out small contracts, inflate costs, and bill the city. Millions vanish on paper. Henry leaned against the counter, his voice calm but edged. So this isn't just about pride anymore. Luke nodded. It never was. A soft beep came from his laptop. New email. Ethan had replied. Got your message. Doyle. Development. Heard whispers. If you've got evidence, send it encrypted. Don't use local networks. These people have friends in state offices. And Luke, watch your back. Luke exhaled. He's in. Maya sat beside him, her hands trembling slightly as she pushed a strand of hair behind her ear. "What now?" "We build the case," Luke said. "Send Ethan everything. If we can prove Doyle's using federal grants for fake infrastructure, it moves UWs from small-town corruption to federal crime." Henry looked thoughtful. "And what happens when they find out you're the one who sent it?" Luke didn't answer. Valor stood, padding closer to the door, sniffing. The dog's muscles tensed again. A pickup truck slowed outside, paused too long, then drove away. Maya turned pale. "They're watching me, too. A man's been parked across from my apartment every night since yesterday." Henry crossed the room and pulled an old revolver from a drawer beneath the table. It was clean, well-oiled, and wrapped in a piece of cloth. "This isn't the kind of problem you solve with emails," he said, placing it on the table between them. Luke frowned. "We're not shooting our way out of this, Grandpa." Henry gave a slow smile. "Didn't say we would. Just don't forget how far cowards go when they're cornered." The phone buzzed again. Ethan was calling. Luke put it on speaker. "Talk to me." Ethan's voice came through, deep, even. "I checked federal procurement records. Doyle Development's been getting contracts through a fake regional office, Ridgefield Civic Renewal Fund. It's not even real. The money's being washed through construction projects that don't exist." Maya's eyes widened. "That's why they're building that new community center no one asked for." "Exactly," Ethan said. "And Hanley's department signs off on the safety permits. He's the inside man." Luke felt the weight of it settle over the room. "Can you link it?" "Not yet," Ethan replied. "But the paper trail's close. I'll dig deeper. You and your source need to stay quiet. And Luke, remember, corruption this old doesn't die clean. It fights back." The line clicked dead. Maya looked down at the table, whispering, "They'll come after anyone who knows." Henry poured another cup of coffee, his movements slow, deliberate. "Then you do what soldiers have always done, son. You hold the line." Luke stared into the fire, his reflection dancing in the glass of the stove door. "They think they can scare us into silence," he said quietly. "They don't understand. We've already lived through worse." Valor whined softly, pressing his head against Luke's leg. Maya managed a small smile. "He believes in you." Luke knelt, scratching behind the shepherd's ear. "He believes in doing the right thing. Guess that makes two of us." Outside, the morning fog thickened, swallowing the outlines of trees. Somewhere in the distance, a hammer echoed from the construction site of the community center, the sound of deceit building itself into the landscape. Henry watched the window. "You ever notice how easy it is to build something crooked?" he murmured, "and how hard it is to make it straight again?" Luke didn't answer. He pulled the flash drive from the laptop and placed it in a small tin box beside the broken compass his grandfather had tried to give him. Two symbols of the same truth, one old, one new. Both fragile, both worth protecting. The fire crackled louder, and the three of them, soldier, veteran, and guard, sat in silence. Valor's tail thumped softly on the floor, steady as a heartbeat. Outside, snow began to fall again, slow and soundless, as if the world itself was holding its breath for what came next. Evening draped itself over Ridgefield like a dark curtain. The snow had stopped, but the street still glistened with ice that reflected the orange glow of the streetlights. Inside the Carter cabin, a single lamp burned near the window, throwing long shadows across the floor. Luke sat hunched over the table, scrolling through scanned documents on his laptop. Names, contracts, signatures, all tied to Doyle Development, LLC. Every line he read made the pattern clearer. Fake companies, inflated invoices, public funds that disappeared into silence. Valor slept nearby, his massive frame curled at the foot of the wood stove, occasionally twitching at distant sounds only he could hear. Henry poured coffee into 3 mismatched mugs. "You've been staring at that screen for 5 hours," he said. "Even wars take breaks." Luke rubbed his eyes, exhausted. "Wars have rules, Grandpa. This doesn't." Before Henry could reply, headlights swept across the window. Luke froze. Valor's head lifted instantly, a growl rumbling from deep in his chest. Henry moved to the window and peeked through the curtain. Pickup truck, parked across the road. Luke closed the laptop and killed the lamp. The room fell into darkness except for the orange flicker of the fire. The sound of a door closing outside followed. Then footsteps in the snow. Maya's voice came softly through the door. "It's me." Luke exhaled and opened the door. Maya stepped in, wrapped in a heavy green parka, her breath turning to mist. "They followed me again," she said quietly. "A man in a black SUV. He stayed outside my apartment until dawn." Henry gestured to the chair near the fire. "Sit, warm up." She sat down, pulling off her gloves. "I've been digging through the mall's contractor files, found out more. Doyle's company isn't just laundering money. They're selling permits for properties that don't even exist. Hanley signs off on every one." Luke frowned. "We've got the data. Ethan's building the case. Once he's done, we'll hand it to the Bureau." Maya looked at him, fear flashing behind her determination. "If we live long enough to hand it over." The words hung in the air. Henry stirred his coffee slowly. "People like Doyle don't fight clean. They use fear. Fear's cheaper than bullets and lasts longer." Before Luke could answer, his phone buzzed. A message from Ethan. "Be careful. They know I'm involved. They're watching comms. Don't trust local law." Luke's stomach tightened. "They've traced him." Henry's eyes hardened. "Then they'll come for you next." Across town, Sheriff Brody Hanley sat in his office, the blinds drawn. The smell of cigarette smoke and old paper filled the room. Opposite him, Mayor Doyle leaned back in the leather chair, his silver hair gleaming under the fluorescent light. He was a man in his 50s, fit, handsome in a cold, deliberate way, the kind of man who spoke softly because power did the shouting for him. Hanley's voice was low, cautious. "It's spreading online. The video, the files. People are asking questions." Doyle didn't look up from his drink. "Let them. Curiosity dies faster than courage." "Still," Hanley said, "we have to contain it. The soldier's stubborn, so's the girl. And that old man, he's a symbol now. People talk." Doyle finally looked up, his eyes like glass. "Symbols can be broken, Sheriff. You said you had a man for that." Hanley hesitated. "Carl Denton. But he's not the same since the war. Doesn't like rough orders." Doyle's mouth twitched into a thin smile. "Then remind him what loyalty buys, or what betrayal costs." Hanley nodded, though unease rippled through his expression. He'd done many things for power. Small things, quiet things. But this was different. "If this goes wrong, Mayor, we're both finished." Doyle rose from his chair and buttoned his coat. "It won't go wrong. Ridgefield forgets easily. That's what keeps it quiet." Back at the cabin, Luke had just finished encrypting Ethan's last batch of files when a soft thud came from outside, like boots sinking into snow. Valor's ears shot up. His growl was low, but continuous this time, steady as thunder before a storm. Maya turned toward the sound. "That's not the truck from before." Luke grabbed his jacket and flashlight. "Stay inside." He stepped out, Valor close behind. The night was silent, the forest standing like dark walls around the clearing. The flashlight beam cut through drifting flakes of snow, landing on a tire track that hadn't been there an hour ago. It led toward the tree line. Something glinted near the fence post, a small piece of metal. Luke crouched, picked it up. A bullet casing, fresh. A voice came from the shadows. "You don't know when to quit, soldier." Luke froze. The flashlight swung toward the sound, a figure half hidden behind a tree. It was Carl Denton, the deputy. His badge glinted in the beam, but his eyes were tired, the kind of tired that comes from losing yourself too many times. Luke straightened, his voice calm. "You here for a friendly chat?" Carl shook his head slowly. "You need to stop. You, the girl, the old man. You're stirring things better left buried. And if I don't?" Carl looked away. "Then they'll make it look like you never came back from Afghanistan. A drunk, a disgrace. Accidents happen." Valor stepped forward, a low growl rising from his chest. The deputy took a step back, his hand trembling near his holster. Luke's tone dropped. "You really want to do this here, Carl? In front of him?" For a long moment the two men stared at each other. Then Carl exhaled sharply and turned away. "I didn't sign up for this," he muttered, disappearing into the woods. Luke stayed still until the sound of the truck engine faded in the distance. Then he returned inside, snow clinging to his boots. "They're trying to scare us," Maya said softly. Henry nodded. "Then it means they're scared." Luke sat, eyes distant. "Ethan needs to send the files out fast. Once the light hits this thing, there's no putting it back in the dark." Henry looked at him, the fire reflecting in his eyes. "You sure you're ready for what comes after?" Luke didn't hesitate. "It's not about ready. It's about right." Valor settled beside him, resting his head on Luke's boot, eyes still fixed on the door. Outside, the wind picked up, howling through the pines like the voice of something ancient and waiting. And somewhere across town, Mayor Doyle stared out his office window, watching snow fall on a city built on silence. "If truth wants a war," he murmured to himself, "then Ridgefield will give it one." 3 days later, Ridgefield was no longer the quiet mountain town it pretended to be. Reporters had arrived from Denver and Salt Lake, their satellite vans parked near the courthouse. Headlines filled every screen. "Corruption scandal rocks Colorado town. Mayor under federal scrutiny." From the porch of the Carter cabin, Luke watched the chaos unfold through the lens of the morning news. Valor lay beside him, ears twitching every time a reporter's voice echoed from the TV inside. Henry sat nearby in his old armchair, wrapped in a thick wool blanket, his gaze calm but distant. "You stirred up a hornet's nest," he said, sipping his coffee. Luke gave a faint smile. "Wasn't me. It was the truth." Henry grunted softly. "Truth's got a way of biting back." The hum of tires crunched along the snowy drive. A black SUV rolled up slowly, government plates gleaming. Luke stood instinctively, hand brushing against Valor's head. The door opened, and a tall woman in a dark suit stepped out. Special Agent Dana Whitmore was 42, sharp-featured, with ash-blonde hair tied in a low bun and the no-nonsense stride of someone who had buried too many lies in her career. Her expression was calm, but her eyes scanned everything, the trees, the windows, the rifle mounted above the mantel inside. "Sergeant Carter?" she asked, voice firm. "Yes, ma'am." She nodded once. "FBI Anti-Corruption Division, Denver Field Office. We received encrypted data from your contact, Mr. Miles." She reached into her coat and produced a folder with a federal seal. "You've done something brave and dangerous. You're on the record now." Luke motioned for her to step inside. Henry stood slowly, giving a small nod of greeting. "You'll have to excuse the mess," he said, gesturing to the papers scattered across the table. "We weren't expecting company." Whitmore gave the hint of a smile. "This is cleaner than most town halls I've been in." Maya arrived moments later, wrapped in a heavy scarf, still cautious. She stopped short when she saw the agent. "You're real?" Whitmore chuckled. "Last I checked." She turned serious again, pulling out several printed documents. Mayor Doyle, Sheriff Hanley, and multiple town officials are under investigation for racketeering, fraud, and obstruction of justice. The Bureau is executing warrants today." Henry leaned back in his chair. "Took you long enough." Whitmore's gaze softened. "Sir, these things move slowly, until someone lights a fire. You and your family just did." Across town, the first domino fell. Mayor Doyle's office door burst open. 2 agents entered, weapons holstered but ready. Doyle was standing behind his desk, his tie half undone, a tumbler of scotch in his hand. He didn't even look surprised. "So the cavalry finally came," he said dryly. "Mayor Doyle," one agent said, stepping forward, "you're under arrest for bribery, embezzlement, and obstruction of justice." Doyle smirked. "You can't prove anything." "Actually," the agent replied, "we can. Your digital records, offshore accounts, and contract trail from Doyle Development to Hanley's department, all verified. You should thank your IT staff for labeling things so clearly." The smirk vanished. His glass hit the floor, shattering like the illusion he'd built for 20 years. At the sheriff's office, Brody Hanley sat at his desk when 2 unmarked sedans pulled up. The deputies froze. The sheriff's hand hovered near his badge, but he didn't reach for it. When the door opened, he found Agent Whitmore standing there, her tone cool and even. "Sheriff Hanley, you're under arrest." "For what?" "For forgetting which side of the law you're on." He looked around the room, searching for someone to defend him, but every deputy had gone still, even Carl Denton, who stared at the floor in shame. Hanley's jaw clenched. "You don't know what you're doing, lady." "Oh, I do," Whitmore replied. "You sold this town piece by piece. Now it's taking you back." By noon, the streets buzzed with sirens, news crews, and whispers. Residents gathered near the courthouse steps, watching as the 3 men, Doyle, Hanley, and Travis, were led out in handcuffs. Travis's eyes darted wildly, his arrogance gone. The same people he used to mock now filmed him with their phones. In the crowd, Maya stood beside Luke, her face pale but determined. "It's over," she whispered. Luke shook his head slightly. "It's never over. Justice just catches up." Reporters pushed forward, microphones flashing. One woman called out, "Sergeant Carter, can we get a statement?" He paused, then said quietly, "Justice doesn't need fame. It just needs to be seen." The crowd hushed. Cameras clicked. In that moment, Valor stepped forward beside him, the sunlight catching the dog's sable coat. Someone snapped a picture, Luke's hand resting on Valor's head, both staring ahead as the arrested men were loaded into cars. The image would soon circle the internet with the caption, "Loyalty has no rank." That evening, the Carter cabin was warm again. The storm had finally lifted. Henry sat by the fire, watching his grandson and Maya talk softly near the table. On the screen, the news replayed footage from earlier, Agent Whitmore's press conference confirming the federal charges. Maya's voice trembled. "They offered to move me to Denver for witness protection. I said no." Henry looked up. "Why?" "Because running isn't living," she said simply. Luke smiled faintly. "You're starting to sound like him." Whitmore called later that night. "Sergeant Carter, it's official. The Bureau's filing the case as part of a larger corruption network. You and your family will be credited for exposing it. Congratulations." Luke didn't smile. "We didn't do it for credit." "I know," Whitmore said softly. "That's why it matters." After the call, silence settled. Henry turned toward the window where Valor sat, watching the snow fall. The old veteran's voice broke the quiet. "You know, Luke, when I fought in Korea, I used to think courage only lived on battlefields. But you proved me wrong." Luke looked at him, eyes gentle. "You're the one who taught me what it means." Henry chuckled. "All I did was survive long enough to see you fight your own war." Outside, the snow glittered under the moonlight. Valor shifted closer to the hearth, resting his head on Henry's boot. The warmth of the fire danced across their faces, 3 souls bound by blood, loyalty, and the kind of courage that never makes headlines but changes everything. And as the news anchors on the TV spoke about justice served, Henry reached down, scratching Valor's neck. "He's a good soldier," the old man murmured. Luke smiled. "Best one I ever had." The fire popped softly, echoing like a salute in the quiet of the mountain night. Spring came quietly to Ridgefield, soft and clean as forgiveness. The snow that had buried the town for months melted into streams that whispered through the pine groves, and the mountains once again showed their green shoulders to the sun. It had been 3 months since the arrests, 3 months since corruption had been torn out of the town like a rotten root. The scars were still there, boarded windows, broken trust. But life was returning, slow and steady, the way it always does when people remember hope. Luke Carter stood in the middle of the newly built Veterans Memorial Garden, where the old parking lot used to be, the very place where his grandfather had been humiliated that winter morning. Now it was a field of marble and light. Bronze plaques lined the walkway, engraved with names of men and women who had served. At the center stood a polished granite stone bearing a single inscription, "To those who stood tall when the world looked away." The dedication ceremony had drawn half the town. Reporters were gone, and the snow had long since vanished, leaving behind damp soil and the smell of renewal. Luke wore a clean gray flannel shirt and faded jeans beneath his Army field jacket. His eyes, steady and calm, followed the slow movement of the flag in the wind. Beside him sat Valor, now older, his shell fur streaked with gray around the muzzle. The dog's ears flicked as children laughed nearby, chasing bubbles that shimmered like small ghosts of light. Henry Carter approached the podium, leaning slightly on his cane. Time had bent his back, but not his will. He adjusted his glasses and looked out over the crowd, faces young and old, veterans and civilians, people who had once turned away but now stood together. "We don't need medals to prove our worth," he began, his voice rough but strong. "All we need is the courage to do what's right, even when no one's watching." The wind caught his words, carrying them to the flag above. Luke felt something tighten in his chest. This was the moment he had fought for. Not victory, but peace. Maya Brooks stepped forward next. Her dark hair was shorter now, and she wore a simple navy jacket with the town's new seal stitched on the sleeve. After the scandal, she had been appointed chief of security for the Civic Center, the same place she had once been fired from. She smiled gently at Henry, holding out a small velvet box. "Mr. Carter," she said softly, "we had this restored." Inside lay the Silver Star medal Henry had earned in Korea, the one lost decades ago and forgotten in official records. Its surface gleamed in the afternoon sun. Henry shook his head slowly, pushing it back toward her. "You keep it, Miss Brooks. You stood tall when others bowed. That's what this means." Maya's eyes shimmered, but she nodded and pressed the box to her chest. Luke stepped beside his grandfather, resting a hand on his shoulder. "You once told me, courage isn't found in war, but in how we protect what's right." Henry smiled a little crookedly. "I did say that, didn't I?" Luke nodded. "I finally understand it." Valor barked once, as if in agreement, drawing laughter from the crowd. The sound of it broke something loose inside Luke, a pressure that had lived there too long. He crouched, scratching behind Valor's ears. "You did good, soldier," he murmured. "You always do." As the ceremony ended, people lingered, shaking hands, hugging, remembering. Henry and Luke stood at the edge of the garden, watching the last light of day slide over the mountains. The flag rippled gold in the sunset. Maya joined them, holding 2 cups of coffee from a nearby stand. "Black, no sugar," she said, handing one to Luke. Still your habit?" He smiled. "Still yours to remember." They stood together in silence as the sun dipped behind the ridge. The light caught the names on the plaques, making them shimmer like stars beneath the flag. Henry looked up, his voice a whisper. "She's beautiful, isn't she?" Luke followed his gaze to the flag, its edges glowing crimson and gold. "Yeah," he said softly. "She is." A young boy approached timidly, holding a small folded note. "Mr. Carter," he said to Henry, "my dad said you were a real soldier. Can you sign this?" Henry chuckled and knelt down, taking the note. His old hands shook slightly as he wrote, "Be kind, be brave, and never walk away from what's right." When the boy ran back to his mother, Henry exhaled, smiling faintly. "Guess I still had one speech left in me." Luke placed a hand on his shoulder. "You had a lifetime of them." The crowd thinned. Dusk settled, soft and golden. The garden lights came on one by one, bathing the memorial in quiet warmth. Valor lay down beside the granite stone, eyes half closed, tail tapping against the grass in slow rhythm. Luke, Henry, and Maya stood together for a long time, saying nothing. There were no more enemies, no more secrets, only the steady hum of a town breathing again. As night fell, the camera of memory would have caught one last image. 3 figures and a loyal dog beneath a waving flag, the wind carrying the sound of promise through the pines. In the glow of that moment, the story of Ridgefield closed not with vengeance, but with grace. In Ridgefield, justice didn't come from power or politics, or even from anger. It came quietly, through the hands of an old soldier, a faithful dog, and a grandson who refused to look away. And maybe that's the real miracle, because sometimes God doesn't send thunder or angels. He sends courage, in the form of ordinary people who choose to do the right thing when no one else will. Henry's stand wasn't just about one moment in a parking lot. It was a reminder for all of us that faith isn't only found in churches, but in the choices we make each day. When we forgive instead of hate, when we protect instead of ignore, when we love even after being hurt. If you believe that miracles still happen, not in the sky, but here, in the quiet acts of human kindness, then share this story. Write in the comments where you're watching from, and let's pray together for the strength to stand tall when the world looks away. May God bless you, your home, and everyone you love. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe so you'll never miss the next tale where grace, courage, and hope still find their way through the storm.